Hi, I'm Gina, and basically my presentation is going to be my experience with UX and things that I wish I had known before I got into UX. Um, okay, so first, design is not just an aesthetics. I think this is something that a lot of people misunderstand, especially even now when I go and visit people and I'm like, oh, I'm a design major, I'm pursuing design. A lot of people, their first assumptions are, oh, fashion, game design. But no, design isn't just about making things look good. There's a lot of thought process into it, especially considering the users and understanding that we're coming from an empathetic standpoint. So just to give more context on what kind of design I'm talking about. And so who am I? Basically, I'm a rising junior at Carnegie Mellon studying design in the communications track. I was previously in products, but I'm solely focused on communications now. I'm doing additional minors in human-computer interaction and intelligent environments. So the experience that I have outside of school is currently I'm a UX intern at Colgate-Palmolive. We're doing a project on accessibility and design systems. And then also right before I started that, I was an augmented design researcher at HCI's department, which is at my school. In 2019, I was the DC Scores communication intern, and then the other two are just things that I did my freshman year. And something to keep in mind is a lot of the three internships that I mentioned, they're all very different. My communication internship was not like what I'm doing now. Even the research, they're all very different, but a lot of things that I learned you get to use in other spaces. So it's really nice that a lot of these overlap. So how have I gone here as a UX designer? So first, I was a fine arts background in high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and so design was something that came really late. I was able to sit in one of the CMU design studios from someone I knew ahead of time, so that kind of changed my mind. I started learning basics of design, which was really difficult. I struggled a lot in the beginning, especially my freshman year. I had a lot of considerations on if this was for me, one, because it was so different. Drawing for design and drawing for art is very different. In the design realm, you really want to make sure that your work is easy to convey. So it's not how realistic it is, but just if someone can briefly look at it, can you convey the message that you want? And then I started getting into research, which was super helpful, more so into designs thinking. So systems thinking, stakeholders, customer journey maps, looking into those really helped my growth as a designer. And then I learned some external skills. So at CMU, computer science is really big and something that I never really considered going into, but as I started pursuing HCI, it was something that I was required to do. So I took this coding class, which was for creative minds. It was supposed to be easier, but I struggled. I learned JavaScript and P5.js, which wasn't as helpful as I thought it would be, and I thought that would be the end of my coding journey. But my sophomore year, I learned HTML in a communication design studio, and that changed my whole perspective. It was so helpful. And one thing that I think really stuck with me that a professor said was, just because you're a UX designer, just because you're in design doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn external skills. And for this specific case with coding or HTML, when you go in the workforce and you're a UX designer working with developers trying to get some product done, you want to be able to communicate with them. So, just having that small knowledge is definitely helpful, especially with conveying your idea. Let's say I have my sketch file, my Figma or XD, and I give it to them and there may be a problem or some type of, interaction that may not be possible. Being able to communicate that and talk with the developer is so helpful. So that's super important and something that really helped me get to the UX designer that I am now. In addition, it doesn't have to be coding. I feel like external skills are always helpful. I know someone in my class doing cybersecurity, and I know she's doing a lot of different things, and I think it's really beneficial, not even just for your work, but just for personal growth. And now here I am working in UX. There is kind of a gap, but I'll definitely talk about it later on in the presentation. So what exactly is UX and UI? So I kind of combine them because I feel like they are very different, but then at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of considerations that you can keep with both. So one, design is everywhere. Everything you do, everything you use, there's some type of design consideration, which is super important and something that I feel like as a UX designer, you really want to consider, especially when you're trying to implement your the product out there. You want to make sure that you're considering the other things that may affect the experience that users are going to have. And so basically what I do is I first start off with the research. I'm thinking about my user, thinking about what challenges I'm going to have, just doing some landscape analysis of what other people have done. And if this is something new, looking at what other people have done similarly. And then I want to empathize. And what that means is I want to be able to really connect with my user, do a lot of user testing, talk with them, just understand where they're coming from. And then I'll make my first iteration or make a few iterations and I test them. The reason why I have a blank circle is because I feel like that spot is usually kind of like determining whether or not I'm doing another iteration because the testing didn't turn out well, or if there's more ideas, then it's always there. And then after that's finalized, I want to develop my product and make sure that it works by user testing again and confirming that it's doing what I want it to while also creating a great experience. So what are the takeaways that I've learned and wish I had known beforehand? So these are things that I learned in my experience, right? So everyone has different experiences. So this isn't something that you have to, really implement into your work. That's not what I'm here for. It's just like suggestions or like tips that, you can keep in mind. Also, if you have any questions or I'm not making sense, just like cut me off. Like I'm completely fine with that. So first is understanding the difference of empathy and sympathy, accessibility, design theory, using different skills, and research. And I circled research because I think that is the most important thing as a UX designer, and a lot of things that people kind of forget. A lot of people subcategorize UX research and UX design, but I think if you can do both, like that makes you such a more stronger candidate. So first, empathy versus sympathy. This is something that I actually learned my freshman, sophomore year, I don't remember, but it really stuck with me because, as design has evolved, before it was designer focused. So a lot of the experiences that you had were from the designer's shoes, but now it's a lot user focused because we want to make sure that the experience is, more personalized to that specific person rather than just one person. So understanding the difference of empathy and sympathy will actually take you a long way with your work. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is a lot of people confuse empathy with sympathy. And I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, it's like the same thing, or it's not really the same thing, but it's so easy to differentiate. Who's not going to know? But it's so hard when you're actually working and you're trying to kind of forget you in the work or when you're talking to a user. So understanding that you want to come from an empathetic standpoint when you're trying to make a better experience, but some people misunderstand that with sympathy. And there was like a quick animation, I don't really remember. Oh, it was like Renee Brown and it's called Empathy. If you watch it, it's really helpful because she gives you a big perspective on it. And it's just important to realize that you can be empathetic while not having sympathy, just to make sure that you're being a good UX designer. Sorry, I'm like really saying the same thing, but I think it's super important. And then next, outside skills. I really talked about how I had some coding experience, and I think it's super helpful just to get some kind of like outside skills as much as you can, just because design isn't just secluded to itself. And also being able to learn other things, so much helpful when you can communicate. And not only that, you're going to work with so many different roles as a UX designer. Not even as a UX designer, I feel like any role, you work with so many people. I'm sure you work with management, marketing, product managers, there's so many people. So having some kind of like, even if it's very limited, some knowledge of other things is definitely helpful. So yeah, it doesn't have to be coding, it doesn't have to be like writing, it can be anything, but definitely just very beneficial so you're not secluded to just design. Because I think one thing that I regretted and I wish I had known was like being able to experience other things outside of design, because my first year at CMU, I was so focused on just design that I didn't get to experience anything else. And it was really sad now that I look back at it. And My roommate and my suite mates are all in CS, and they're all working for really nice companies. And whenever I talk to them, like previously, before I had the coding experience, I literally had no idea what they were talking about. I just sat there dumb, you know? But now I have a little brief knowledge, so I may not know exactly what they're saying, but I can ask them questions like, oh, what did you mean by that? And not only that is that helping me, but that's also helping them to make sure that they're understanding and applying the knowledge and having a positive transfer. So design theories. Why is this so important? I think when I first learned about it, it's actually required to take a design course every semester. And when I took them, I thought it was pretty useless in the beginning, which now I take that back. It's so important. You learn so many things, especially with like stakeholders. And I'm just going to show like a quick example of something that I did previously. And so basically what this is a stakeholders map. We were required to look at a problem in our area and try to understand the system of what's going on. So on the left, you can see the stakeholders as they're going down by level. And from there, we're trying to see the direct and indirect relationship amongst each other. And then we look at the goals and strategies and tactics. And when we're doing that, it's really helpful when you're trying to create some kind of intervention or some type of product to help, because then you can see the pain points of this problem. And so here we were able to get that information and create an intervention. And something that I know is pretty like important is that solutions are something that has to happen like overnight. It's not like has to happen, but like something that happens immediately. So it's really difficult to say that you're creating a solution as a UX designer. So saying that you're making an intervention is much helpful because one, that's just allowing you to create some kind of, I guess, awareness to what's going on. And then that stakeholder will be able to learn on their own and then create their own solution, which I think is much more beneficial. And so as we're going on, you can see all these lines, and these lines are just us analyzing and understanding where the direct relationships are coming, where the indirect relationships are coming. And so just understanding that is super important in your work. And with this, it's so much more helpful to have some kind of map done so that once you're looking into what kind of products you can create, you have a better idea. So yeah. And then accessibility. One thing that accessibility has been doing is it's been on the rise. A lot of companies have been slowly starting to implement more and more, which is really important. I think it's been important from the beginning, but it's just, I think, more of a societal thing that culturally hasn't been as aware. And the whole idea about accessibility is making your product as accessible to as many people as possible. The description that I have is more geared towards web accessibility and more focused on people for disabilities. And that's completely one way to look at it. And it's super important because as a UX designer, you're trying to make the experience of someone using your product better. So, you know, a lot of people say that accessibility is just kind of a nuisance or it's not as necessary because, you know, you have to consider that and it's a lot more work, especially when you're working with developers. So understanding that if you can make your work more accessible to everybody, not only does that mean more people can use it, but you're really bettering the experience that you're trying to convey. And, you know, accessibility goes with like, you know, someone needs a screen reader, making sure that your work will be able to be used in a screen reader, or color contrast, text size, just making sure that is plausible, which is kind of ironic because this presentation does not go over the accessibility guidelines. So yeah, there's a lot of research on accessibility and there's guidelines, especially for web accessibility, that you can look into. There's WCAG and there's like websites are graded. So if you're AAA compliant, that means you're typically more of a government website because there's literally nothing you can really do. And then AA is what most websites are, and it's a great way to understand like, okay, why is this AA? Just understanding the accessibility behind this. Okay, and research without assumptions. One, research is so important as a UX designer or UX in general. I feel like a lot of people, or if you look at a lot of roles, they're split up into UX design and UX research. But in my opinion, and from what I've experienced, it's so important to be well-rounded. So just because you apply for a UX design role doesn't mean you should have background experience with research, because that research can really help you. especially when you're trying to engage your users more. Like, just because you're designing a product doesn't mean that you're not going to have to look into what you like more about your user, if that makes sense. I don't even know if that makes sense. But you definitely have to research a lot, even if it's not your role. And so the reason why I say without assumptions is that to make your work better, you want to make sure that you're not assuming anything. So let's say you do an interview and someone says like, oh, I don't like meat, and you're assuming that it's because of a religious reason. You don't want to assume. You want to verify by, in that interview, asking extra questions and be like, oh, can you clarify on why you said that? So making sure that you're not making assumptions will help your project so much more. And one of the biggest like design failures is due to assumptions that people create or designers create. So it's just so much more helpful to get rid of those assumptions. And if you have assumptions, I feel like everyone does, like I personally always do by accident, but but in order to like avoid that, it's just a great way to think about it. And also just double checking your work or your products, like making sure like, oh, am I sure that the user is okay with this type of interface, or am I sure that this is clear to the users? So just making sure that you're getting rid of those assumptions is super important. So yeah, any questions? So I got into UX UI more so in my classes. Like I was able to work on projects in class about UX UI. So they give you a lot of freedom of like what kind of stuff you can work on. So we started working on like app development for the dining system problem that our school was having. And from there, we were able to, on our own, I guess, do more of our UX research and just understanding what it is. And then after doing that, we were able to discuss with our professor and go over it. And I honestly feel like UX, a lot of people say like when they're looking for jobs, like, oh, we want 3 to 5 years of experience. I don't think that's important at all. Like, as long as you yourself are being active and trying to do things, like design challenges are great ways. Like I even do that right now at work. Like every few weeks we're creating some kind of like website or app with a prompt that my manager gives me, and it's so helpful to do. Like not only does that give you like a great way to like use your creativity, but also just a great way to keep practicing and understanding that trends are changing, and also you want to like consider other things. So making sure that you're always like practicing that is so helpful. Hopefully I answered your question. What do I think is the next big thing in UX? I think right now, maybe I'm just biased because like the project that I'm working on is about accessibility, but I think being able to implement accessibility into UX is going to be so much bigger, because I feel like UX is definitely like a lot of people know about it, but I feel like being able to put accessibility with that would be so much more helpful and make more awareness. Also, yeah, another thing, I might be biased just through the experiences that I've had, but I feel like there's some places that really, really love UX, and there's some other places that still don't really consider UX as a big deal. So I think one thing is just making sure that UX is, I guess, being respected in the sense, because I feel like a lot of people don't really still understand the difference of like just regular design and UX